So we're going to continue talking about Niger now. Joining me now is one of the lawmakers who attended the Senate briefing this morning, Michigan Democratic Senator Gary Peters, who's a member of the Armed Services Committee. Talk to you. I was listening to all those senators and members of Congress who had different briefings coming out saying that they're disturbed, that they should let the military, cut the military some more slack, don't know, have more questions than answers. I almost wonder, was everybody at the same briefing? Because some say that they got what they needed, others say that they're very confused by what they got.
Well, I can't speak for others as to where they may be in the process. The briefing was really twofold. One was about the specific instance of what happened in Niger, about the ambush. We did ask a number of questions in that briefing. Some were answered, but quite frankly, a lot of them still are yet to be answered. And that's because there's still an in-depth investigation, so they were not able to provide some details. I know many of us were a little frustrated by that, but I also appreciate the fact that this is something that's very important. You got to get it right, and you got to make sure all the facts line up correctly. But I think the second part of the briefing, which is extremely important in my mind, and the questions that I asked, well, what does this mean about strategy generally in West Africa? You know, I was just recently in Nigeria, just a couple months ago, another area where there's increased significant terrorist activity related to ISIS of West Africa. I think it's very, very serious. So we are seeing increased activity in West Africa, and I think it's important for Congress to understand what is the administration's strategy in dealing with this, what sort of direction does the military have in dealing with it as well. And we have not had that kind of complete and full discussion. Today was a start, but we need to do a lot more.
So I guess the question a lot of people have, regular civilians, American citizens, say, look, obviously we have a military that has civilian oversight, that is, and you are our civilian representatives in having that oversight. But at the same time, running the military, especially with the troops that we have in as many countries, more than 100 countries around the world, that's obviously not something a guy like you is going to have your head around. So where's the line? How much information do our members of Congress and senators need to have? Is it bad that there are some members of Congress who did not know that we had certain troops in Niger or what their mission was? Or is it there are American troops everywhere? How are you supposed to know? I don't know what does right look like here? What does success look like in congressional oversight of the military?
Well, I think we rely on the military to make sure that they're letting us know the assessment of risk and where that is around the world. And certainly we're focused right now in places like Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria along the Russian border. West Africa, though, the threat is growing, and it's fairly clear. In fact, when I was in Nigeria, it became very clear to me that we have a serious situation there. In fact, with nearly 2 million internally displaced people, which is incredibly disruptive, not just for West Africa, but can lead to the migration of folks into Europe, which can be destabilizing. It's a home for terrorists, so we need to know that. And also, we need to know it so we can provide the resources that the military needs. So one challenge for folks in Africa is just the immense size of it. So to have the type of intelligence and reconnaissance assets that you need to monitor it requires Congress to step up and provide those resources. But I think it's our obligation with civilian control of the military that we have to understand what the goals are, what the strategy is before we provide hard-earned taxpayer money. All
right. So I guess part of the issue, and I want to just play you a little bit of what Senator John McCain had to say about it. Let's talk about it on the other side.
Okay.
I think that it's very clear that the lack of defense funding has been responsible for the wounding and deaths of Americans in uniform. Why did it take 48 hours to recover Mr. Johnson's body, among many other questions? There's a commitment from the administration to keep us routinely briefed, which was not the case before.
Is the issue of adequate funding? You know, we've heard a lot of issues, not enough information, not sure what the mission is, knew that there were forces in Niger, didn't know that there were special forces, special ops forces in Niger. Is this issue of not enough funding as being responsible for the loss of these soldiers something that comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I can't get to that conclusion at this point. I can't get to that conclusion from the hearing that we had, or the briefing rather, that we had this morning. But I do think there's a general concern about the resources to have proper intelligence and reconnaissance in Africa. We have heard that in Congress, that only maybe 20 to 30% of what is necessary to adequately cover that region of the world has been appropriated. But whether or not that would lead directly to what happened with the ambush, I want to wait to make sure all the facts are out before I make that kind of comment. But I think stepping back, generally, yes, it is something we need to discuss. But before you appropriate that money, it's also important for Congress to understand what the long-term strategy is. How does it fit in with the overall war against terrorist groups? And I think it's important for the American people to know that. This is their money. This is their taxpayer dollars that will go there. And quite frankly, I think we also owe it to the men and women who serve in the military. We can't be expecting them to go everywhere and fight everywhere and put their lives at risk everywhere without understanding this is part of a strategy that has been thought out.
An important mission and a strategy, and one in which our civilian leaders will have their back. Senator, thanks very much. Obviously, this is just the beginning of an important discussion that we're going to have for a long time about this. Senator Gary Peters, a Democrat from Michigan and a member of the Homeland Security and Armed Services Committees. Thank you.